first speaker will be Jerry Dickey, who will be speaking about the Rancho Verde project, homesteading on the Arizona Strip. Now, Jerry was what we call a canyon kid. He spent many years here from in the 50s and 60s, and his research connection with the park has remained strong. He's conducted archaeological and historical research for the park and on his own ever since 1998. He's co-authored a book on Grand Canyon rock art. He's also written numerous reports for the Park Service as well as the Grand Canyon Museum archives. So I'll present to you Jerry Dickey.
Okay, I'm going to read to you just because it's 20 minutes, if I can see it. For many years, I have conducted volunteer work on the Arizona Strip, that area between southern Utah and the Grand Canyon, for various land management agencies. During that time, I have come across numerous historic campsites, decaying wooden structures, old corrals, and inscriptions. The inscriptions often appeared as brands, dates, initials, and sometimes names, all of which held little meaning to me, but did stir my interest. Some of the place names in the area, like Big Jackson Tank, Hancock Knolls, and Robinson Wash, also aroused my curiosity. While initially not my primary focus, my interest in the stories behind these relics eventually led me to begin conducting research into these historic names and places. This has provided me with a deeper appreciation for the homesteading period in this area. This presentation will focus on Rancho Verde, one of the most successful of the Arizona Strip homesteads. I had come across a passing reference to a Rancho Verde cattle operation, but was unable to locate any further information until I obtained a copy of the book, which is up here somewhere, The Last Homesteader on the Arizona Strip by Jean Luttrell. In this book, Jean details the story of Al Craig's homestead, the Rancho Verde. With the help of Tom Martin, I reached out to Jean, the youngest daughter of Al Craig, and expressed my interest in documenting and recording the Craig homestead. Jean and her family, the current owners of the property, kindly granted me permission, and I arranged to meet with her eldest son, Chuck, so that he could walk me around the site. Later, I was able to visit Jean and her husband, Ben Luttrell, and during which time they and Chuck shared many photographs and memories of their time on the Arizona Strip. On my first visit to the homestead, I immediately noticed abandoned farming machinery scattered about. Al had sold his business, the Pacific Garage in Redondo Beach, California, prior to moving to the Strip, and therefore had the means to purchase these items, mainly from homesteaders leaving the area as drought conditions made farming untenable. Although not a farmer, Al was a skilled mechanic and salvaged parts from these machines to use on other projects. Beyond the discarded equipment stood the two-story ranch house. Although in serious disrepair, it was still impressive. I learned that in the late 60s to early 70s, Chuck and his brother often spent summers with their grandparents and would usually sleep in the upstairs loft of the house. The remains of a tree house and chin-up bar that Al had built for the boys were still in the front yard. Protected exterior areas still provided evidence that this was indeed once a Rancho Verde. I had noticed in Jean's book that the letters RV appeared on each of her chapter headings, and now here they were carved into a post on the front porch, the Rancho Verde brand. Behind the house stood the tilted remains of the storage shed, with jars and cans still on the shelves. Walking on through the trees, we passed a grader, a water wagon, and an old sheepherder's wagon bearing the inscription, Craig, August 1945. We soon came to an area that Chuck called the boneyard. Numerous barrels, Cans, a generator, a pickup truck, 2 wringer washers, and various parts were scattered about the area. Continuing our walk, I spotted crosses in the distance and thought this might be a family burial ground. It soon became apparent, however, that this was the family pet cemetery, containing 8 crosses and approximately 17 burials in total. Chuck also pointed out where the barn and the original Craig house had once been located. Later, with the help of a small crew, I began the process of recording the site, beginning with what Chuck had described as the residential dugout. The place had partially collapsed upon itself, but still could be accessed from the midsection. The only resident that day, however, happened to be a rattlesnake. Another structure recorded was an old trailer that Al had brought to the site as a seasonal renter for hunters. This enterprise lasted only 1 season, however, as Al was disgusted by the behavior of his renters and never again allowed hunters on his property. Instead, he posted no hunting signs. While listening to the family recollections, viewing family photographs, reading Gene's book, and recording the Rancho Verde, I obtained an understanding of the Craig family's story and insight into the difficulties faced by Arizona Strip homesteaders. So let me introduce you to the Craig family. Here's Al on the left, and to his left, our daughter Margaret, his spouse Mary, and daughter Jean. In the far right photograph is Al's mother, Almeda. Despite romantic notions regarding living off the land and being one's own boss, homesteading on the Arizona Strip was not easy. Nevertheless, this did not prevent the arrival of new settlers. In 1916, the government had authorized the Stock Raising Homestead Act, which allowed homesteaders to claim up to 640 acres of land. And in 1919, the following dispatch appeared in the Mojave County Miner. For the little community of Mount Trumbull, the future is quite promising. We are building reservoirs and cisterns, so we will have water during the dry season. The ranchers around here have been very liberal in letting us haul water from the reservoirs. This almost unknown country is very valuable for stock raising, and there is room here for a good many homesteaders that wish to raise stock. Given the large amount of rainfall in the region between 1906 and 1920, plus new possibilities for land ownership, the Strip appeared to be a lucrative spot for anyone willing to put in the work. Al Craig was looking for a change, and this seemed like a perfect opportunity. Al made several trips to the Arizona Strip beginning in 1927. He found the existing homesteaders to be friendly and helpful in directing him to a favorable spot for his claim. His wife, Mary, eagerly supported the venture, and Al's mother, Almeda, saw the move to Arizona as an opportunity to stay close to her son and his family while being part of this grand adventure. Almeda, who had taken on the care of her daughter Ethel's 2 teenage boys, knew the grandsons would be useful in helping to establish the new homestead, and both she and Al filed adjacent claims in 1930. Al immediately put his California business up for sale. In addition to selling the business, however, he needed a house built on the new property before he could make any final move. That year, Al hired Jim White, a local homesteader, to build the new family house. When the Craigs returned in November, they found a new home that lacked a door and had windows placed so high that one could hardly see out of them without a step stool. Another neighbor, Mal Terry, explained that Jim had hired him and his boys to build the structure and kept part of the money for his role as a subcontractor. Mal built per Jim's instructions, and when Mal questioned the window placement, he was told that the new people from California wanted their windows to be high to capture more of the sun and keep the place warm. Mal explained that since he had only been hired for the job a month prior, he hadn't had time to finish. Almeda and her 2 grandsons moved from their home in Barstow, California to the new homestead in March of 1931. They stayed in the now completed Craig house while Mal and his boys constructed her new house nearby. Al and his family, deemed tourist homesteaders by the locals, continued to visit the homestead in the summer months, during which Mal helped Al build a barn and a storage dugout. Al's youngest daughter, Jean, was born in 1932 in Redondo Beach. By 1935, the Pacific Garage still hadn't sold. Almeda's oldest grandson had married a girl from Bundyville and moved away, while the younger grandson had joined the Civilian Conservation Corps over on the Kaibab. Al knew his mother would need help on the homestead, so he enlisted 16-year-old Louis Roeder from Redondo Beach to stay with Almeda. This proved to be fortuitous because the winter of 1936 to 1937 brought a record amount of snowfall to the Arizona Strip, creating many hardships. Al attempted to drive out to the homestead in December with supplies, but due to the heavy snowdrifts, he was unable to get to Almeda and Lewis until February 16th of 1937. The Craigs lost 7 horses, 3 cows, and 1 mule that winter. In 1937, the California business finally did sell, and that December, the Craig family moved to the homestead full-time. They settled into their new lifestyle, each in their own way. Al was now a rancher and was living his dream. Mary, shown here on the white horse, was content to play her version of the role of the cattleman's wife and wrote many letters to friends and family describing her new life. Margaret, pictured on the dark horse, was at first pleased with the new situation, but soon yearned for friends her own age, especially boys. When a Civilian Conservation Corps spike camp was set up near Mount Trumbull, teenage Margaret basked in the attentions of some of the CCC boys who kept coming by the Craig Ranch. Mary's constant letter writing took up far too much of her time, in the opinion of Almeda, who felt that she wasn't helping enough with the daily work. Despite her frustration with her daughter-in-law, however, Almeda was happy to be able to help in fulfilling her son's dreams. Jean was generally happy with the new experience, especially when helping her father. With money from the sale, Al was able to rent a house in St. George so that the girls and their mother would live there during the school year and return to the ranch during the school break and in the summer months. In March of that year, Al traded one of the family cars to Wayne Lamar Thomas, a local cowboy, for 7 cows, their calves, and a bull. After the winter storms of 1936 and 1937, dry conditions returned to the Arizona Strip, and water was again an ongoing concern for everyone in the area. Al spent years drilling for water on his property to no avail, and was forced to continue his dependence upon shared springs. At the Craig homestead, Al devised a gravity-fed system to supply water to the kitchen. He constructed a dirt mound behind the ranch house for his water barrels and connected them to a pipe that ran water down into the kitchen sink. To conserve the water supply, wash day was limited to Saturdays in a wash tub on the porch. Despite the general attitude regarding the sharing of water resources, some disputes did arise. Perhaps the most infamous was the one leading to the killing of Jim White. Jim was known for his unkempt appearance, lack of hygiene, and generally unpleasant disposition. He had built a small shack near a spring on the north side of Mount Trumbull, which locals came to refer to as White's Spring, although legal rights were held by Walter Kent. Jim liked to refer to his place as the Canyon View Ranch, although there is no actual view of the Grand Canyon from there. In 1938, Jim arranged for a visit of a mail-order bride from Oceanside, California. Undeterred by Jim's appearance or the reality of the so-called Canyon View Ranch, they were married in June. Al seemed to easily tolerate Jim, although Almeda couldn't stand him, and Jim would often visit Al for conversation and the prospect of free tobacco. On July 19, 1938, Al stopped at White Springs to fill his water barrels and while he and Jim were engaged in idle conversation, they heard horses approaching. Laura Jordan, the daughter of Gus Jordan, a two-weep rancher, rode up with several horses in tow. Although Walter Kent had leased the abandoned Upper Kent homestead to the Jordan family earlier that summer, including the right to use the water at White Springs, Jim had refused access to the Jordans and had angrily chased Laura away just the day before. Now she had returned, and Jim flew into a rage, running toward her, yelling and throwing rocks. His dogs began barking and charged the horses. Jim screamed profanities as Laura attempted to maintain control of the horses when suddenly Laura's father rode out from behind a nearby water tank. Jim turned and ran toward him, cursing and reaching inside his shirt. Gus pulled out his rifle and shot Jim twice. Al, who had witnessed these events unfold, walked over to Jim's lifeless body and suggested that Gus turn himself in to the Bundyville deputy sheriff while he stayed with the body, took care of the dogs, and informed the new bride of her husband's death. Shaken, Gus agreed, and the Jordans left. In November, the trial of Gus Jordan was held in Kingman, Arizona. Gus stated that he believed Jim had been reaching for his pistol as he charged toward him. Al gave his eyewitness account, and several other homesteaders testified as to Jim's previous threats and behavior. The court found that Gus had acted in self-defense, and he was acquitted of the charge. Jim's widow, believing that she would inherit White's Canyon View Ranch, sent for her grandson, Tommy Beal, to help her run the place. Tommy stayed with his grandmother, but spent much of his free time with the Craigs, preferring their company to that of his grandmother. Tommy was well-liked, and according to Jean Luttrell, he soon became part of the family, all of which may explain the RV by his inscription. It wasn't long, however, before the new Mrs. White discovered that Jim had no legal right to the spring and had failed to divorce the original Mrs. White, Nellie, who was living in Fredonia with Jim's two sons. Since the new bride was not legally married, she had no claim to the property, and by the summer of 1940, she and Tommy had left the area. On October 19, 1939, while Mary and the girls were in St. George for the school year and Al and Louis Roeder were off retrieving cattle, Almeda accidentally left the damper open on the chimney at the Craig house, causing the roof to catch fire. Almeda injured herself attempting to fight the fire, and the Craig house was lost. With the help of Louis, Al constructed the residential dugout prior to the return of the family from St. George. Almeda stayed at St. George while recovering from her injuries, and the family moved into her house while Al built room additions. This is a structure which still stands today. The year 1939 did bring some good fortune. Al had become aware of springs located on the Esplanade near SOB Canyon, now known as 150-Mile Canyon. Preston McDonald had built a corral on the rim above the canyon, and upon his death, Al was able to purchase the water rights and improvements. In 1940, Al also obtained grazing rights for the area, and he and Louis Roeder went to work improving the trail down to Buckhorn Spring. Over the course of several years, Al established 2 major camps and at least 1 smaller camp on the Esplanade. Use of this area proved to be pivotal to the success of the Rancho Verde over the next several years. Al's ability to graze his cattle in an area less affected by winter storms and which contained water for his livestock allowed the Rancho Verde to survive the record-setting blizzards of 1949 and the ensuing dry periods unscathed. In 1943, the Craig family became acquainted with John and Laura Riffey, the Park Service ranger, and his wife stationed at Two-Weep. John and Al owned the only shortwave radios in the area and kept in touch daily. Al's large radio antenna still stands today. Al helped John fight forest fires in the area, and with a bulldozer bought from John, He created a landing strip at the Rancho Verde for John's Piper Cub and cleared the path for the first pipeline running from Nixon Spring down the mountain to the pond below. After John's wife died in 1962, he became a frequent dinner guest at the Craig homestead. Margaret married and moved away in 1942, and in early 1953, Jean left to attend college at UC Berkeley. That same year, Almeda suffered a stroke, and in March of 1956, she died at the homestead. That left only Al and Mary to run the ranch. Al decided to sell his cattle in 1957 and lease his water rights. During the ensuing years, as tourism increased in the area, Al installed a gas pump in front of the home to provide additional income until Al's failing health forced the Craigs to move to St. George. Thank you very much.